Welcome back, everyone. So glad you're here with me today. The story I'm bringing you right now is about Vivian, a sharp, self-made woman who built everything she has on precision. She knows what she wants. She knows what's right. She knows where every line is drawn. Until she meets Celeste. Celeste is brilliant, warm, and entirely spoken for. She belongs to someone else. She has a life, a commitment, a future already mapped out. And none of it includes Vivian. But love doesn't ask for permission before it arrives. And Vivian is about to discover that the most terrifying feeling in the world isn't wanting someone you can't have. It's realizing you've been watching her for months and calling it nothing. A story full of tension, impossible choices, and the kind of silence that gets heavier every single day. Stay with me until the very end. I promise. This one will stay with you. I should have looked away the first time I saw her laugh. That's the thing about moments like that. They don't feel dangerous when they happen. They feel ordinary. You're standing in a room full of people, holding a glass of something you're not really drinking, and someone across the room laughs. Really laughs. The kind that tips the head back and closes the eyes. And you think, oh, that's a nice sound. You don't think, this is going to cost you something. You don't think anything at all. I need to back up. Because if I start from the moment everything got complicated, you won't understand how badly I didn't want it to be complicated. My name is Vivian. I run a mid-size architectural firm in Chicago. 18 employees, 3 major ongoing projects, and a reputation built on the fact that I deliver exactly what I promise and nothing I don't. I'm not the most charming person in any room. I'm the most reliable. That's been enough for 36 years, and I had no plans to renegotiate the terms. I met Raina at a conference in late September. She was presenting on sustainable urban design, something about the way cities breathe, about the invisible infrastructure of how people move through space. I sat 3 rows back and thought, she thinks differently than most people I know. That's rare. I should remember her name. We ended up at the same after-party. Found each other at the corner of the room the way people who don't love parties tend to find each other, near the exit, holding drinks we weren't finishing, both pretending to look at our phones. She said, I counted. There are 14 conversations happening in this room, and 11 of them are about the same 3 things. I said, what are the 3 things? She said, budget overruns, prestige projects, and someone named Derek, who apparently can't manage a timeline. I almost smiled. You counted. I always count, she said. It's a problem. We talked for an hour and a half. About design, about the way institutions resist change, about the specific exhaustion of being good at something in a field that rewards spectacle over substance. She was funny in the way that serious people sometimes are, dry, a little devastating, with no apparent interest in making sure you knew it was a joke. By the time the party started thinning out, I knew 3 things about Raina. She had a firm in Seattle. She'd been working on a waterfront project for almost 2 years, and she was engaged. She mentioned it the way you mention the weather, as information, not emphasis. My fiancé thinks I over-prepare for presentations. A pause. She's probably right. I registered it the way I register most peripheral information. Noted, filed, irrelevant to the main project. Raina was interesting. Raina was not available. Those 2 facts coexisted without any friction at all. I went back to my hotel and slept fine. That was September. Celeste came in October. Raina emailed me 3 weeks after the conference. She was doing a project in Chicago, a mixed-use development near the river, and she'd been contracted to collaborate with a local firm. Was I interested in being that firm? I said yes. The project was good. The terms were fair. The work was the kind I actually care about. None of my reasons for saying yes had anything to do with Raina herself. None of them. The first meeting happened at my office on a Tuesday morning. Raina walked in with 2 of her team members, and a woman I had never seen before who was carrying a leather portfolio and already looking at the ceiling. Not the people in the room. The ceiling. She was studying the light fixtures, the angle of the windows, the way the afternoon sun was going to move across the west wall. I could see her calculating something, her eyes doing that slow tracking thing that architects do when we're not trying to be social, when we forget for a second that other humans are present. I knew that look. I'd been told I had that exact look. Rena introduced everyone, and when she got to the woman with the portfolio, she said, "And this is Celeste, my senior associate. She's essentially the reason the Seattle side of this project exists." Celeste pulled her attention from the ceiling. She looked at me, and she said, very simply, "You changed the proportions of the entrance. From the original render. The column spacing is different." I blinked. "I did. 8 months ago." "How did you—" "I looked up your building before I came. I like knowing spaces before I'm inside them." She tilted her head. The change was better. More honest about the load. I didn't know what to say to that, which is not something that happens to me often. Rena was watching both of us with an expression I couldn't quite read. The meeting lasted 2 hours. We covered timelines, budget structures, design language, site constraints. Celeste contributed precisely when she had something to add and said nothing when she didn't. Her observations were the kind that rearranged the whole conversation, not because she was performing expertise, but because she actually saw things other people missed. By the end of it, I had revised my working assumption about the project's central challenge, not because Rena had changed my mind, because Celeste had said one sentence about the way water moves through compressed urban space, and I hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. I told myself that was professional. That was the appropriate response to a good idea. That was exactly what collaboration was supposed to feel like. I went home that Tuesday night and made dinner and didn't think about Celeste at all, except that I did, but I called it thinking about the project. There's a difference. I was certain there was a difference. We had meetings every 2 weeks throughout November. Celeste and I were the ones who ended up managing most of the back and forth. Rena was juggling 3 other projects in Seattle and trusted her team to handle the Chicago logistics, which meant Celeste and I talked more than anyone else did, which meant I learned her rhythms before I learned her full name. Her full name was Celeste Arden. She drank her coffee black and too hot and would hold the mug with both hands, even when it had cooled down to room temperature. She was almost never the first person to speak in a room, and almost always the last voice you remembered. She had a habit of going quiet when she was thinking, not uncomfortable silence, the kind that has weight and purpose. And I started learning to read the difference between the silence that meant she was processing and the silence that meant she'd already decided. I told myself I was learning to read her the way you learn to read a collaborator. Professional calibration. Nothing more. Then came the Thursday in November, when we stayed late, going over the structural drawings. We'd sent everyone else home. The office had that particular stillness that happens after 6 in the evening. The heating system settling, the city outside going quieter, the light turning amber in the windows. We were spread across the conference table with drawings and coffee cups and my laptop open to the model. We'd been working for 3 hours straight. At some point, we'd both taken off our jackets and rolled up our sleeves, and the conversation had stopped being formal. Not unprofessional, just easier. The way it gets when you've been focused on the same problem long enough that the social scaffolding drops away. Celeste was marking something on the physical drawing with a pencil. She still did that, still worked on paper first, and she said without looking up, "Can I ask you something that isn't about the project?" I said, "Go ahead." "Why architecture?" I looked at her. She was still looking at the drawing. "What do you mean?" "I mean the real reason." She glanced up then. Her eyes were a specific shade of dark brown that I had somehow not registered until right then, in that light, at that distance. Not the answer you give at conferences, the one that's actually true. I was quiet for a moment. I don't usually answer questions like that, I've gotten very skilled at redirecting them. But something about the way she asked, no pressure, no performance, just genuine curiosity, made me say something true instead. Because buildings outlast the people who make them, and I like the idea that something I designed will still be standing after I'm gone, and the person walking through it will feel something without knowing why. They'll feel that the ceiling height is right, that the light falls exactly where it should. They won't know my name, but they'll feel it. She was quiet for a second. That's the loneliest answer I've ever heard, she said. I opened my mouth to object. And the most beautiful, she added, quietly, like a correction. I didn't say anything. I looked down at my coffee mug. She went back to the drawing. We worked for another hour in silence that felt completely different from any silence that had come before it. I drove home, and the city felt slightly altered, like the grid had shifted by 1 degree. I told myself it was the cold. It was late November in Chicago. Everything feels heavier in late November in Chicago. But I sat in my car in the parking garage for 4 minutes before I went upstairs. Just sitting, not doing anything. I don't sit in my car doing nothing. I'm not that kind of person. The calls started being longer. I told myself that was because the project was getting more complex. Which was true. But the project could have been covered in 40 minutes and we were talking for 90. We'd wander into design philosophy, into things we'd read, into the specific frustrations of trying to make something lasting in a field that cycles trends like fashion. She made me laugh exactly twice in October and 7 times in November. I know, because I noticed. I don't usually notice things like that. My assistant Priya told me I was different on project days, and I told her she was projecting. She raised one eyebrow and went back to her desk. Priya has worked for me for 4 years. She does not project. I started thinking about the engagement. Raina had mentioned it once in September, and I'd filed it under irrelevant. But now I was aware of it in a different way. The way you're aware of a step you have to be careful on, not obsessing over it, just knowing it was there. Celeste was engaged to Raina. Raina was smart, accomplished, and genuinely good. There was no villain here. There was no opening. There was a woman I liked talking to, and that was all it was, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. I repeated this to myself with the focused precision I bring to load calculations. By December, I had stopped believing it. December brought the site visits. We walked the riverfront 3 times in the first 2 weeks of the month. Chicago in December is a particular kind of cold. Not just temperature, but texture, like the air has weight and intention. You have to dress for it seriously. And you have to keep moving. The first site visit, we were 5 people. The second, we were 3. The third, the one that happened on the 17th, a Friday afternoon, when the sky was going gray and the light was the color of pewter. It was just the 2 of us. Raina had a call she couldn't push. The other team members were managing a supply issue on a different project. It was just Celeste and me, walking the site with our drawings in a folder, and the wind coming off the river in waves. We didn't talk as much as we usually did. The cold made conversation more deliberate. You didn't say anything you weren't willing to commit to, because every word cost breath. We moved through the site methodically, marking notes, checking sight lines, documenting the way the light moved across the existing structures. At one point, we were standing at the eastern edge of the lot, looking out at the river. The water was dark green and moving fast. The skyline behind us was beginning to blur into the gray sky. Celeste said, "I'm going to miss this city." I turned to look at her. "You're leaving?" "After the project wraps. We'd always planned to go back to Seattle." She paused. "Well, Raina always planned it. I'd planned to figure it out when I got here." She said it with a particular lightness, the kind that means the thought underneath is heavier than the delivery suggests. I said, "Do you want to go back?" She took a breath. It came out visible in the cold. "I think I thought I did," she said. Before. She didn't say before what. I didn't ask. We stood there for maybe 30 seconds in silence, looking at the river. The wind picked up and she shifted closer, just slightly, just enough to block the wind. And my whole body registered it before my brain had a chance to categorize it. Warmth. Proximity. The specific pull of wanting to close a gap that isn't yours to close. I stepped forward, toward the site markings, creating distance that felt necessary and terrible in equal measure. We should document the north corner before the light goes, I said. Right, she said. Her voice was even. We walked to the north corner. We documented it. I didn't look at her for the rest of the site visit. Not directly. That night, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without eating the dinner I'd made. I kept looking at the wall. There was nothing on the wall. I looked at it for a long time anyway. What I was feeling wasn't confusion. That was the difficult part. I knew exactly what this was. I'd spent weeks performing confusion because confusion was manageable. Confusion meant I might be wrong. Confusion meant there was still a version of this where I walked away without having done anything wrong. But standing on that riverfront, feeling the warmth of her standing 2 feet to my left, watching her say she might not want to go back, I wasn't confused. I was terrified. Because she had a life. She had Raina, who was kind and accomplished and who trusted her. She had a future that was already mapped, and I was not on that map, and I did not have the right to want to be on that map. And I wanted it anyway. I wanted it the way you want to keep breathing, without deciding to, without being able to stop. Christmas happened. The project paused for 2 weeks. I didn't talk to Celeste. I worked. I ran, which I hate, but which gives my body something useful to do with the energy that has nowhere to go. I went to my mother's for 3 days and ate too much, and answered questions about my life with the particular skill of someone who has been protecting her own interior for a very long time. My mother asked me, on the second night, whether I was happy. I said, "I'm fine, Mom." She looked at me the way mothers look at daughters who are lying without knowing why. "That's not what I asked," she said. I refilled her wine glass. Changed the subject. She let me, because she always lets me. Because she knows I'll come back to things eventually. On my own terms, in my own time. I didn't sleep well for most of January. The project resumed on the second Monday of the month. Our first call back was supposed to be routine. Status update, timeline check. Nothing that required more than 40 minutes. It lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. Celeste told me about a building she'd seen over the holidays in Vancouver. A converted warehouse along the harbor, the way the original industrial bones had been kept, and the new glass insertions just floated within the existing structure, like the new was having a conversation with the old rather than replacing it. She said, "It made me think of what you said, about buildings outlasting people. But this one felt like it was having a longer conversation, like it was still mid-sentence." She remembered. She'd been thinking about something I'd said in November, at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night over coffee that had gone cold, and she'd kept it. Carried it across a holiday and a new year and a distance. I said, "That sounds like something I'd want to see." She said, "I'll send you photos." She did. That evening, without prompt, 12 photographs, meticulously organized, with captions. I looked at every single one twice. I told myself I was being a professional. I was appreciating the documentation. And then I saved the photos to my personal phone, not my work device. And I put my phone face down on the counter and stood at my kitchen window for a long time. The thing about keeping a feeling pressed down is that it takes constant energy. Not dramatic energy, not grief or rage, just this steady, low hum of effort. The kind of effort that leaves you tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. I was managing it. I had always been good at managing things. But management is not the same as absence. And late January turned into February, and February meant the project was entering its most intensive phase. and Celeste and I were talking almost every day. And every single day I was falling further behind on the pretending. February 14th was a Tuesday, completely unremarkable professionally. We had a call in the morning, solved a drainage issue that had been bothering both of us for weeks, and confirmed the revised timeline with the city. At the end of the call, before we hung up, Celeste said, "Happy Valentine's Day, Vivian." She said my name. She always said my name, not as a formality, but the way some people say it to mark a sentence, like punctuation. I said, "Thanks. You too." She said, "Raina is flying in tonight. She was supposed to last week, but the project pushed." I said, "That's great." I said it evenly, professionally, like someone for whom that information has only one dimension. There was a very short pause. "It is," she said. "Yeah." We hung up. I sat at my desk for 5 minutes without opening anything on my computer. Then Priya knocked and came in with a question about invoicing, and the day moved forward the way days do when they have no interest in your internal complications. But before we go on, if you've made it this far, you already know what's happening inside Vivian. Even if she's still trying to tell herself she doesn't. That feeling she's carrying, that low hum of effort, a lot of us know exactly what that weighs. So if this story is hitting something real for you, go ahead and hit the like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it means everything for this channel. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and turn on notifications. So the next time I bring you a story like this, YouTube makes sure you don't miss it. Now tell me something in the comments. Have you ever had to sit across from someone and act completely normal, when nothing inside you was normal at all? How long did you manage it? Type it for me. I read every single one. And tell me, what city are you watching from? I'll leave you a heart. Now, back to Vivian. Raina's visit lasted 4 days. I didn't see Celeste during those 4 days. There was no professional reason to. The calls that week could wait. I let them wait. On the Thursday, Raina stopped by my office alone, which I had not expected. She sat down across from me and she looked like someone who had decided to say something and was still deciding how. She said, "The project is going well. Better than I expected, honestly." I said, "Celeste runs a tight process." Raina said, "She does." And then she looked at me for a moment. "She talks about you." I held very still. "About the project," I said. "About the project," Raina agreed. "And other things, the conversations you have." She quoted something you said about buildings and loneliness back to me last month like it was something she'd been thinking about for a long time. I didn't say anything. Raina was quiet. She wasn't accusatory. She wasn't even sad. She was considered. Like someone working through a structural calculation of her own. "I know Celeste," she said finally. "I've known her for 4 years. I know how she talks about people she just likes, and how she talks about people who—" She stopped. "She's very honest, Celeste. Even when she doesn't mean to be." The room was very quiet. "Raina," I started. She held up one hand. "I'm not here to have that conversation. I'm not sure there is a conversation to have. I'm just—" She looked at the window. The city outside was gray and flat and going about its business. I love her, and I want her to be happy, and I've been trying to make sure I know what that looks like. A pause. For both of us. She left 15 minutes later. We talked about the project for most of it. We were both professional. We were both holding something carefully in both hands. I didn't call Celeste that evening. I stood at my kitchen window for a long time. The city hummed and moved and had no particular concern for any of this. I thought about what Raina had said. Not the words exactly, but the space between them. The way she'd said I know her. The way she hadn't been angry. The way she'd said, "I've been trying to figure out what happy looks like for both of us." Something shifted in my chest, not dramatically, quietly. The way ice shifts in late March, not breaking, just releasing something it had been holding all winter. I had spent 5 months telling myself that nothing was happening, that the careful management was the right thing, the decent thing, that as long as I never said anything, never did anything, never moved an inch past the professional distance I'd constructed, I was doing no harm. But Raina already knew, and she'd still chosen to come tell me, not to warn me off, but to be honest about what she saw. She was more honest with me about her own relationship than I had been with myself about what I was feeling. That was the thing that finally broke the surface, not the feelings for Celeste. Those had been there so long I'd started to think of them as ambient, like background noise, always present. What broke through was the recognition that pretending had a cost too, not just to me, to everyone inside the radius of it. I'd been so focused on what I couldn't do, couldn't say, couldn't allow myself to want, that I'd stopped asking the simpler question. What was actually true? Celeste and I had a call the next morning. Friday. It was supposed to be brief. The city had approved a revised element of the design, and we needed to discuss the adjustment. We covered it in 12 minutes, and then neither of us hung up. She said, How are you?" And something in the way she asked it was different. Not softer exactly. More open. Like she was asking the actual question, not the professional placeholder. I said, "I've been better." A pause. She said, "Me too." Silence. Not the heavy kind. The kind that happens when two people are standing on either side of a door and both of them know the door is there. She said, "Vivian." "Yeah. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't pretend not to know. I'd used up all my pretending. I said, "I don't either." Another pause. Outside my window, the city was moving, indifferent, enormous. She said, "I think I need to figure some things out." "Yeah," I said. "And I think I've known that for a while, before Chicago, before this project." Her voice was very steady. "I don't want you to feel like you caused it." "I don't," I said. And I meant it. Because whatever this was, whatever it had been quietly becoming over 5 months of calls and site visits and coffee gone cold, it had found something that was already there, in both of us. Not created it, found it. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. We stayed on the line for a few more minutes without saying much. And then she said she had to go. And I said all right. And we hung up. I didn't move from my desk for a while after that. 6 weeks later, Celeste called me on a Saturday morning. Not a work call. It was 9:43 and my coffee was still hot, and the city outside was doing that early spring thing where the light is different, thinner, sharper, like it's just remembered how to be real again. I answered. She said, "Are you home?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm in Chicago." I set my coffee down. She said, "Raina and we talked, for a long time. Multiple conversations. She paused. She was honest with me. And I was honest with her. And we both knew, I think, that we'd been holding something together that had stopped fitting for a while. Not because of you. This is important to me that you hear that. Not because of you." I said, "I hear you." Because I needed to know what I actually wanted, and I kept finding that when I imagined a future, really imagined it, I kept changing things. Small things. The city, the apartment, the person I came home to. I was very still. She said, "I'm not asking you anything. I'm not standing outside your door with a declaration. I just wanted to..." She stopped. I could hear her breathing. I wanted to say something I've been not saying for a long time. Okay, I said. A pause. I think about you, she said. Not about the project, not about work. I think about the Thursday in November when you told me why you became an architect and the way you looked when you said it. I think about the riverfront in December and the way you walked away from me, and I understood why. But it still... She stopped. It still did something. I was quiet for so long, she said. Vivian. And I said one sentence. It was not a declaration. It was not a speech. It was the sentence I had been not saying since November, the one I had buried under performance and professionalism and the very careful management of everything I was not going to let myself feel. I said, I think I've been thinking about you since the first day we met. The line went quiet. I didn't fill the silence. I didn't add anything. I didn't apologize for it or qualify it or walk it back. I just said it. And then I waited. And the thing about Celeste, the thing I had known since that first Tuesday in my conference room when she looked at the ceiling before she looked at anyone in the room, was that she was honest, even when she didn't mean to be. What I heard in the silence was not nothing. I heard her exhale, slow, like someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has finally decided to stop. I heard the sound of the city outside her window, and I recognized it. It was the same city. She was 5 minutes away. I didn't say anything else. Neither did she. And the silence was not the kind that closes. It was the kind that opens. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't the gesture, it's the sentence. The one you've been carrying so long it's become part of your weight, until the moment you set it down and realize how light the air feels after. If this story found something in you today, type "spoke" in the comments. So I know you made it all the way here with me. And if you want to stay in this space, more stories like this one, more of the feelings we don't always have words for, click the video that's on your screen right now. Take care of yourself. And I'll see you in the next one.